If you've ever browsed the non-fiction section of a library, you may have noticed that the books aren't arranged alphabetically, by size or by colour, which admittedly would have made a much more entertaining experience. If you look on their spines, they each have their own set of numbers. It's like each of them have their own little serial number, except they're not serial numbers because they repeat between books. So it raises the question, where do they come from? What do they mean? And why does fiction not have them? Well, it turns out, like most things involving numbers, it's a system. A simple system, yes, but one that does the difficult task of organising the entirety of human knowledge into neat little numbered categories. This is the DDC, or the Dewey Decimal classification, also commonly called the Dewey Decimal system, and it's been quietly structuring libraries for well over a century. Now, I could try and explain how this system works, but I have a better idea. Let's talk to someone who actually deals with these systems on a daily basis. So I grabbed my camera and hopped on the next tram down to the State Library Victoria to speak with Roxanne Missingham, Chief Librarian at the State Library.
How does it actually work? Because I always see the numbers and it's like 831.6 something, and it just goes on and on and on. What does that mean, and how does that function?
We like to call it the secret code of libraries. But if you go into a public library or if you go into your state library, we'll be using Dewey, which was invented by Melville Dewey. So when Melville Dewey invented this, he came up with really 10 categories of knowledge from his perspective, starting with generalities. So you'll see that the reference works are generally in the 0 to 100, and then work through sciences, geography, and he broke knowledge up into what he saw were the categories.
Alright, so I admit it. Hearing it like that is a bit of a brain tickle. So let me quickly break it down for you. You see, you're given a string of 3 numbers, with up to an additional 3 past the decimal point. The first number marks the main class. There are 10 of these, from computer science, information and general works, all the way to history and geography. The following 2 numbers mark the subclasses, with decimals designating further divisions. For example, if you wanted to find pet dogs, just go to technology, agriculture and related technologies, animal husbandry, dogs, under which you can find pet dogs. So yes, while this system looks complicated, it's really just a giant funnel of subjects, each number narrowing the topic more and more. But organising knowledge this way can create some issues. For example, what if an item could logically fit under multiple categories? Or maybe a category might have such few items, it's not even practical to have. What do you do then?
Sometimes what we do is, and we are doing this at the moment, is to say we really want to be a bit smarter in our storage to make it easier to retrieve more efficiently for staff. And look, we've got 200. Oh, do we really need 200? And we might look, as we did, and go, we've got this collection code and there's 40 things in there. Why don't we interfile them with the other things so they're easier to find? We found a collection last week that had 3 things in it. We don't need a whole code for that. Let's make it easier.
How can you put a piece of literature under one classification when it could fit under 2 or 3?
That is absolutely very tricky. And that then goes to the power of subject descriptions. So we use what are called the Library of Congress subject headings, and they are an internationally agreed massive categorisation. In print, they are large and powerful. Online, it's very important. So you can allocate multiple headings. So it might be a book that's about the history of birds and flora in the Western District. So we would put that under a more general location, but you might say, look, I'm really interested in flora in the Western District. And you go to the shelf and that one is missing because it's been put somewhere else because it's more general. But if you do a search in the library catalogue on the flora in the Western District, you'll be able to see it in the list and then be able to request it or go and find it on the shelf.
Now we have an understanding of how this system works and is tidied up. An interesting question comes up. With over 3 million books being published a year and around 23 to 40% of those books being fiction, which is surprisingly hard to judge as depending on their source, their thoughts of what classifies as fiction, and their individual statistic collection methods can alter this percentage a surprising amount. So why is fiction traditionally not organised in the Dewey system, or the Dewey run as it will later be called? I mean, it's still a book after all, and just because it's not based on history nor fact doesn't mean it should be excluded, right? So why is it?
800s is where we put books around writing, and that's where you will go to see the classics. So if you walk into a library and you're looking for Jane Austen, her works will generally be in the Dewey run, because that sort of historical literature tends to be put in a literary heading, a literary area within the Dewey Decimal system, whereas contemporary literature, which in public libraries in particular is a turnover collection, so I think probably the half-life, I can't remember what I last read of a fiction book, particularly a paper book, is maybe 5 years. So it's a collection that is refreshed by buying new titles, whereas the classics that we want to keep for a longer period of time, and we tend to buy more hard copies, will be in the Dewey runs.
Has there been an attempt to integrate fiction into the current system, or even like for patrons' sake, because you don't want the patrons to look through all the things, maybe its own sort of classification system by itself?
Look, honestly, that is one of the great debates of our time. Should fiction be by genre? For example, should all the romance be together? Should they be in author order, which has been the very traditional way that we've done it? And how can we best help our users find material? So the public libraries generally have them either in genre or just as a straight separate collection by author within a research library, like a state library, or a large university library like the University of Melbourne. We will have it integrated into the classification system that we are using.
Okay. Should we even classify them? Because a lot of people go to read fiction, and so if it's just harder to find, wouldn't that make it less accessible for library goers? And then you go, if it's harder to get to, people go, I don't want to do it, and they just go
And they
home.
just move on.
Yeah.
I think the sort of counterpoint to that as well is serendipitous discovery. So sometimes even when I am selecting books and reading them, I will have picked up something either in print or digitally, and then when I get around on my reading list, and I have many piles of books in every house in my home, as does my husband, you find something and you think, I really don't understand why I picked that, but look, it is absolutely fascinating, and it will give you new insights in a way that you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. Fiction is a really, really interesting and tricky area.
With fiction's placement within the DDC being so tricky, people have been debating if and how fiction would be introduced into the DDC for a while, or maybe it should get its own super in-depth categorization system. So, for an example of why we haven't done it at this point, here are two, let's call them ambitious attempts, for separater categorization outside of the Dewey Decimal system. First, there is Problem Child by R.S. Walker, which attempts to classify fiction using PM, PMEST, EST. It looks thorough, right? Except there are a few issues. It's difficult to apply consistently, and it requires subjective judgments about what elements are most important in a novel to be classified correctly. Interestingly enough, though, it apparently has had some success in a library in Scotland of all places, for which it was developed. Then there is a proposed fantasy classification system, for which I have to share one example because I found it hilariously fascinating. The example given is this. It translates to Invasion of the Earth by intelligent alien beings whose natural habitat is the ground surface of Mars. 5,000 to 20,000 words, heroes' participation in a war, horror appeal, atmosphere stressed, fantasy important, story associated with writings by another author, and is in play form. Also, it's non-fiction and analyzes the reader's psychology. Yeah, it's not entirely practical to implement. I will give them that it is amazingly precise. The issue is that FCS is complex, the notation is disorganized, surprisingly certain categories are missing, and again, it's subject to subjectivity. So maybe we should just throw it all out. The simplest solution is usually the answer. Or maybe we should just continue what we are currently doing for fiction. following in the Library of Alexandria's footsteps in organising everything in alphabetical order by the author's name. Could it be that the Dewey Decimal System is just too complex, and more importantly, too precise anyway?
I think that's a really interesting question. We're limited by the number of numbers. So there's a sort of practical limitation, which is why we end up with collection codes as well, which sometimes is on practicality, like elephant folios have to be filed differently to normal folio-sized books. So it's how would we get the right balance in the act so that people are able to browse sensibly and do that digitally as well, but also we're able to not overwhelm people by having 500,000 items all at the same number.
So this current system, would you say it's more for librarians and the people who have to operate and work behind the scenes every single day than the patrons? Or would you say it's kind of found a nice balance at the moment, or could it be improved?
Every reader, his book is the sort of mantra that we follow. And these rules very much focused on the reader experience rather than the librarian experience. That philosophy has stuck with us. It's been reinvented a couple of times in the last 30 years. But the concept that really the library is here to help organise knowledge and preserve it, but really that knowledge comes to light when the reader can get access to the material they want. So the intention of classification systems has really been around, rather than having this massive experience, to actually have it broken up into what we thought, which may not be completely accurate, what we thought would be of most value to our users at any one time.
When you think about it, that philosophy is really the heart of the library experience. Because of the classification system, you can find the book you came in looking for and then discover 3 more right there on the same topic that turns out you did need. And that experience is the secret sauce of libraries you can't find anywhere else. Yet, Dewey invented the system in 1876 for a world where information only lived in physical books on physical shelves. And I know it has been updated since then. But today, with the huge amount of information being available online via various articles or databases like Wikipedia, bit of a tangent, but fun fact about Wikipedia, Professor Amy Bruckham from the Georgia Institute of Technology's School of Interactive Computing argues that the most popular pages on Wikipedia are the most reliable form of information ever created. Anyway, back to topic, there is an important question to consider. With the way we discover information changing, what role will systems like the Dewey Decimal System play going forward?
So I think there's some really interesting opportunities. If most of our knowledge is digital, and if we digitise so much work, how do we think about what the approach is of users in a world where we'll have a mix of lots and lots of full text material that can be harvested and displayed according to the language or the interpretation of the language that's in the book.
Do you think there's much of a place for smaller libraries, like your local bookshop, not bookshop, but local library and all that? Do you think they'll still be around, or like the way of the dodo, they go extinct?
That's a really interesting question, and lots of times people have predicted the death of the book or the death of the library. But I actually see that particularly local libraries and libraries that are of special interest, like historical society libraries, are having great visitation now. People go to them really for 2 reasons. One is around collections, but the other is to be a community with a common interest. So we see fantastic programs in the state library and in public libraries where we bring authors so that authors can talk to children. And I know our grandchildren who live just south of Orange have just loved the fact that they can go to the local library and see the author of Mr. Anderson's Tractor.
So they're not going the way of the dodo. They're going to be around for a
They're
while.
going to be here for a long time.
There you go. If you're in a library and you see those little numbers on the spines of non-fiction books, it's most likely the Dewey Decimal System, quietly working away to make sure that the books are organised properly into neat numerical categories. Fiction, sadly, still doesn't fit. Attempts to classify it separately get hilariously complex, and maybe it's okay that it's not associated with Dewey. Looking into the future, libraries will be around. Even in far future worlds, like the Endless Library from Doctor Who, they're still there. And as long as libraries continue to need to organise their material, digital, physical, or something we haven't even invented yet, those little numbers on the spine will probably stick around, maybe under an updated Dewey system or something completely different altogether, quietly doing their job. Thank you so much for watching, and special thanks to Georgia from the State Library Victoria for helping set up the interview with the fabulous Roxanne, who I must thank for agreeing to be part of this and sharing all her knowledge. If you have any suggestions on what we should cover next, we would love to hear it, and let us know your thoughts down below on the DDC, if we should alter it or keep it the way it is. Thanks for watching, bye bye!